Thanks very much. It's nice to see all of you. You can tell how familiar we are with everybody on this call and everybody who joins us because we just jump into our stories. So Brad just shared our wonderful builder from Thrive, who's building all the single family homes, that he and his wife are expecting their first child. So we've got a blessed new 2021 already. So that's really exciting. So I want to thank you all. We have a great crowd out there. I know we kind of had shorter notice for this. I want to say that we have now officially shifted our night for this monthly meeting back to the first Tuesday of the month, which is tonight. We had been trying to do the last Tuesday, but just with the holidays, the way it came down, it made a lot more sense to be the first Tuesday. So we will meet again in February on February 2nd, I believe is the first Tuesday. And so we'll jump right into it. We will be completely mindful of everyone's time as we're all watching the Georgia runoff election returns and everything else that's happening. So Mark has put together a terrific update, but honestly, on behalf of all of us, I want to wish you a happy new year. Councilman, if you want to say anything before Mark jumps in, you're more than free to get right in there.
No, I just want to say congratulations to Brad and his wife on their first child.
That's terrific. Good.
You're in for a wild ride.
That's right. That's right. Mark, I think we have about 15 or so slides, and then I've already gotten 7 or 8 questions. So Mark, you just lead us through it.
Before we get started, Marcus, do you want to remind everybody on how to ask questions?
I do, yes. Thank you very much. If you'd go to this next slide, and just for all of our attendees, that was Mark telling me to get through my slides. I think, we can't see you, but we want to hear from you. So, we have a very manageable crowd tonight. Maybe if we get to the end, at the very end, we might have some people raise their hand and we can promote you so you can ask a question. In the meantime, if you would use the Q&A button that you see on the bottom of your screen or the chat function, I'll see either one of them. But if you'll use that, and then we'll wait till the end and maybe raise your hand. So we'd love to get your questions. I've received a couple already. And then I think let's go to the next slide, Jasper. And I think that might be officially a demo update. So I'm going to hand this over to Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, also I will welcome everybody and say Happy New Year's and hope that your holidays were amazing and you were able to spend, some good time with your family and hopefully away from work. Those that live around Loretto know that we've been very, very busy. And in fact, I got a reminder from Councilman Flynn over the holiday break that construction isn't supposed to start until 7 o'clock in the morning. So I do apologize. I'm sorry. We have communicated to our contractors about that. But yes, we've had quite a bit of demo activity going on. And this is just a couple slides that I thought that I'd share with the group. And I want to explain each one of these just real quickly, because each one is on there for a particular reason. One, the image that's all the way on the left-hand side that looks like a burnt out building, that is actually the footprint of what's left of Marion Hall. Walsh Hall is being demoed as we speak right now, and they just finished up the remediation work on it. The middle slide there, that's actually Pancratia Hall. So that is the first time that portion of Pancratia Hall has seen daylight, in a number of years. What's really super exciting is the brickwork behind where Marion Hall came off, isn't in terrible shape. It's not in perfect shape, but it's not in terrible shape. And Jim Hartman and his crew with ICOTA is super excited to have that building disconnected, and they are working through their renovation, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. And then the slide over on the right-hand side, it looks like a gravel pile, with a conveyor belt going up. What you see there is actually the crushing operation. We are crushing the concrete from the demo work, and we are planning to actually repurpose those buildings on site. We're going to use it as road base on the project. So even though Marion and Walsh Hall are going to be gone, the reality is they're still going to live on the campus, just in a different form. So we're really excited to be able to repurpose and not, ship it out to a landfill. So that's our demo update for the project. And then as it goes from a timing exercise, we'll probably be wrapping up all the demo work, sometime in February. The next slide here is just A couple quick slides that I wanted to walk through on Pancratia. Jim Hartman, as everybody knows, bought the property for the Pancratia project back in October and didn't waste any time in getting started out there. He has completed the demo work on the inside, and now they are working on the new construction. And just a couple slides here, and I'll kind of tell you what's going on here. On the left-hand side, it looks like there's new little pop-ups coming out of the roof, and that's exactly what that is. Jim Hartman, in a very clever way, has figured out a way to take the attic space within Pancratia Hall and turn it into lofts. So those are new dormers that he's installing into the roof. So if you drive by, you can see those poking out. That's over on the west side of the project. If you look in the center, it looks like it's a big hole in the ground. This is the area that's, if you remember where the gymnasium is at, what he's doing, he's putting window wells in the gymnasium area, is where I believe that is. And then over on the right-hand side, it's just kind of showing the dormers up on the top over there. But I thought it was a really cool picture, at nighttime with the glowing light on the inside, almost symbolic. I think the councilman actually even used this in his newsletter. He was telling me, whereas it's just kind of showing the building coming back to life, in the beginning stages of construction here, which is super cool. The next slide, please. These are just a few images from the inside of the building. There's lots of activities going on. We just chose 3 here that are my favorites. On the left-hand side, that's the chapel up on the top floor of Pancratia. Many of you have been in there. What's happening and you're seeing is the build out for the rooms that are going to be constructed for that particular apartment. What's going to be really fun about that particular unit, as Jim has explained to me, is the volume of space above that's going to be open, which is really going to keep a lot of the historic features of that space. The next slide is a really interesting slide. Oh, nope, go back. We're not ready for that one yet. The middle picture there is some of the demo work, and what's really fun is just looking at the trusses from the original Pancratia Hall, which when Jim Hartman and his crew took it all apart, what we noticed is like those trusses were actually two-story tall trusses for the roof, which was kind of fun. And then over on the right-hand side is the gymnasium, where you could see the plumbing going into the ground for that particular unit that's going to be where the gymnasium was. Jasper gave you a sneak peek, but come to find out, we have 3 new superintendents, over in Pancratia Hall, with Sister Mary Nell and Ruth and Martha, who did a tour. So they are honorary superintendents, and they're keeping us right on track and making sure that we're doing everything right. They asked a lot of questions, and they did take advantage of the tour that we offered a few months back. Next slide. This is kind of a fun picture, just more nostalgic than anything. What I am showing you here is this is a room that's on the western part of Pancratia on the 2nd floor with some own documentations that I saw. This was called the Roundup Room. And if you look on the left-hand side, that picture, that's actually an old picture when all those archways were open. And if you look on the right-hand side, those are the same archways there, but those archways have been closed up for many, many years. And Jim opened them back up, and it was just kind of fun to see those open. And I thought I'd share that with you, just from the historic nature and all these different parts and pieces that Jim and his team are preserving, not only on the outside of the building, but also on the inside of the building as well.
Hey, Mark, can I interrupt for one
Yeah.
second? I just want to remind everybody the chat function is actually not working, and I apologize for that. So if everybody could just use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, just put your comments or questions there, and we'll get them from there. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, no problem. Do I need to slow down a little bit and let people catch up with some questions here, Mark?
No, I think we're doing fine. I just had sent somebody there, so we're great. Go right ahead.
Awesome. Okay. The next slide here is a slide that you've seen before. This is just as a reminder of our site plan in an illustrative format. Nothing has changed from the last conversations that we've had. We're really starting to hone in on it. And what I thought I was going to show you, we've had a lot of people that have been curious about, like what is some of the massing looking like on this project? Last time when we spoke, we showed a little bit of the massing as it related to areas inside of the quadrangle in relationship to the administration building. And remember, this wasn't showing architecture. It was just simply showing, size and structure of buildings. So this next slide that Jasper is going to show you is just kind of a sneak peek. And again, this is not architecture. This is just showing massing, kind of like form and functions of buildings. And if you look on the left-hand side of the site plan, there's a little arrow that's pointing in, and I'm trying to give you a perspective of the angle that you're looking over on the right-hand side. So where this would be is on the intersection of what will be Federal and Bates, or whatever the road name ends up being for what we've been calling Road A. So that's just giving you a perspective. And this happens to be Lot 4, as we call it on our site plan. And where Grand Peaks, who's our market rate apartment builder, is going to be having some construction built there for their apartment project. So this is just a little bit of a sneak peek on what some of that massing is going to look like. Now, of course, the color is not going to be the same color. The architecture is definitely going to change, but it gives you a sense of the up to, if you remember, we could go up to 5 stories. And as you can tell here, we're not necessarily even going up to 5 stories in all the areas. What I do want to point out here real quickly is the administration building in the background. What's really important to understand is the views, that are being maintained with the administration building. And it does look like that administration building is sitting up higher, and that is because it actually does sit up higher. And I know that's been a concern to a lot of people as far as the views, not only going up the Great Lawn in front of the administration building, but also coming from the side. So we feel really good about that. And that's why one of the reasons why you're not seeing 5-story buildings in that particular location. Marcus, did you have a question there or comment?
I did, yeah. So Mark, actually one of our questions, which you used the phrase sneak peek. So somebody smartly asked that, will all of the attendees on these monthly meetings, will they be able to get a sneak peek tour of some of the residential units when they're being built? So you mentioned that. I'm sure that you will continue to work with folks with Grand Peaks and Thrive when they're in development. Is there a way to kind of do some hard hat tours on some of those projects?
Yeah, I mean, just like on the Pancratia project, we worked with Jim Hartman on that sneak peek, and Jim always has an open invitation, a coordinated open invitation. We can't just show up. But if you are very interested in seeing it, we do want to accommodate you. We do want to get the buzz out. We're very, very proud of what we're doing out at Pancratia and also all of Loretto. I know that as it relates to Thrive, and Brad can probably speak more to this, but I can tell you that they're going to be building model homes, pretty quickly, once we get our zoning done, and those will be open to the public. Whether they have to be scheduled or not because of COVID, I'm not sure, but I'm certain, that that's an opportunity as well from their marketing perspective. And then I just have to talk to Ellie as it relates to what she's got going on with those apartments. But if there's a will, there's a way, as I like to say. We just need to stay in communication.
Absolutely. And so we don't lose Brad. Brad, do you have an initial idea of where your model community or model homes will be built?
I think the first 2 model homes would be a 3-story townhomes that are just to the west of that arrow that's on the screen right now. So not too far from where this picture's kind of showing.
That's great.
Okay, so we can move on to the next slide here because I do want to save lots of time for Q&A. This is our zoning map. We talked about it last time, but I wanted to point out one change to the zoning map that's very, very important. Jasper, if you go to the next slide, please. In that area, which would be at the intersection of Federal and Dartmouth, that used to be part of what was pink. And now, as you can see, it's gray. That is the same zoning that the campus core where all the historic buildings are being placed. And the reason why it got changed from pink to gray is it really fit more with the type of zoning that we're having in the campus core than it does to the pink area. And the most important reason why is because of the Grand Lawn. The Grand Lawn is tied so tightly into the administration building and really goes hand in glove with the administration building that we thought whatever was going adjacent to the Grand Lawn needed to have the same type of zoning as the campus core, so it would fit more within the atmosphere of what we're trying to create. The reality is that the biggest difference between the pink and the gray, it doesn't mean that you can go any taller. It doesn't mean that you can go and build any more dense. It just means that you have more flexibility of the type of development that you can do along the Grand Lawn, meaning that we don't necessarily have to put a street adjacent to the Grand Lawn. Because otherwise, if it was pink, we would have to put a street adjacent to the Grand Lawn just by the way the city zoning code works. And we didn't want to necessarily have to put a street in next to the Grand Lawn if we could figure out a way to do that area without a street there. We thought it would just be more pedestrian friendly and a better atmosphere for the Grand Lawn. And if there are questions about that, when we get to the Q&A, I can certainly go into more detail, but just trying to give you a high level of that. The next slide, if we could go there, please. I just want to talk really quickly about schedule. Schedule has been my Achilles heel on this project. I think when we first met 2.5 years ago, I told you that we would be through zoning at the end of 2019, maybe a year ago. Of course, that hasn't happened. And I think the last time that we spoke, I mentioned to you that we would be through our zoning in February or March, if my memory serves me correctly. Well, unfortunately, I hate to say that that isn't going to happen either. And the new schedule that we got from the city of Denver doesn't get us to zoning until May. We actually have not officially submitted our zoning application, not necessarily of any fault of Westside or any of our consultants or candidly necessarily even the city staff. It's just it's a very complicated zoning as it relates to the PUD that we're creating for the campus core and also for the residential area on the back, where it's all brand new zoning that's being created that's specially catered towards the preservation of Loretto Heights, not only from the features that are there from a man-made scenario, such as the administration building, but also for the natural features that are out there as well with the topo and the views that are trying to be preserved. I do have a lot of confidence, that we are very, very close to submitting our application. I am anticipating that that's actually going to happen next week. We're in the final review of the documents before it officially gets submitted. If that is the case, the first public hearing that the community would be invited to from the city would be the planning board, and that would be on March 17th. And then the second public hearing that the community would be invited to would be on May 10th at City Council, and that would be the second reading as well. And then if all goes well and we get approval by City Council, which we're of course hoping for, we would be able to start construction. I have been spending a significant amount of money on this project up to this point. With our construction drawings, we are on the second or third round of every component of construction drawings ahead of having zoning. And as you can imagine, that was high risk on my side, because if we don't get zoning, I spent a whole lot of money on engineering and site planning for nothing. But the reason why I'm doing this is that I am trying to save time so we can get started on this project and deliver what I have promised to deliver to the community, years ago at this point. If we do have our zoning in May, that means that we would start infrastructure work in June. And if all goes well from that perspective, we would have the about 40% of the roads paved out, I would say, by the fall time period. And then the other phase 2 work, which would be most of the area on the western side, would get done the following spring. So that's a high level of where we are on the schedule. And I suppose I would throw in there too for Jim Hartman and his team, as it relates to Pancratia Hall, they are well underway. Assuming that we get our zoning and we can build all these roads, they would be moving their first residents into the project sometime in the fall time period. And we're super excited about that as well. I think Marcus and Jasper, the next slide is just a Q&A session. And I know I went through this quickly, but as in prior meetings, we want to save a lot of time for questions.
I think that was terrific. Thanks very much, Mark. One follow-up I'm going to ask right there, and when you're talking about Pancratia and Jim Hartman's project, so just so people can understand, it's not just the zoning, to move the whole project forward, but because Pancratia was able to move forward, the zoning has to be completed, right, Mark, for the roadways, for the parking lot to be built adjacent to it. Pancratia also depends on that rezoning. Is that correct?
It is and it isn't, Mark. There's actually two answers to that question. Pancratia Hall was able to start its redevelopment ahead of the rezoning because it does meet the zoning of the current zoning that's on the property. And I think many of you have heard in the past, the current zoning on the property does allow for residential and a lot of it to get built out there. I think people have heard in the past too that we can build up to 150 stories, which would be somewhere between 150 feet, which would be somewhere between 12 and 15 stories. And the FRA, which is the amount of land that you can cover with development, is like 60%, very, very high, about 9 million square feet compared to the 2 million square feet with our down zoning will provide for. We could open Pancratia Hall without zoning. The parking lot would just be the existing parking lots that are out there. The access roads would just be the existing access roads that are out there, or new private roads that we would choose to build on our own. It would be a much better development to have Pancratia Hall hooked into all the new utilities, the new water lines, the new sewer lines, new electrical lines, all the new fiber optic cables that are going in for internet service. But long-winded answer to your question, Marcus, we could open Pancratia under the current zoning, and we could build more residential under the current zoning.
Great. Yep, that was a question that came up. So another one, Mark and Jasper, actually, if you can go to the overall site plan that kind of shows, there you go, in green there. Mark, the question's come up a number of times, but it's a fair one. Will each of these different parts of the community have their own HOA, or what's the plan on HOA for the different types of housing?
Yeah, so a homeowners association is generally set up in order to cover costs for some shared uses. That is generally why you have a homeowners association. It is possible to have a homeowners association out at Loretto Heights. At this point in time, I'm not necessarily envisioning that one will be needed because of the district and the district responsibilities that we'll have out there.
Terrific. Okay, that's great. What are the parking accommodations for Pancratia, since that is the first residential? So we talked a little bit about that, Mark, but at full build out, what are the parking accommodations for Pancratia?
Yeah, so Pancratia actually has 3 different types of parking accommodations, depending on what stage we're in. If we do not get the rezoning, we'll just use the existing parking lots that are out there. In the initial phases of the site development, Pancratia Hall will have a parking lot in front of it, which if you look at Pancratia, you can see that little parking lot right there. That actually is a temporary parking lot. It's not intended to be a future a permanent parking lot. What the permanent plan is, part of our affordable housing agreement that we're entering in with the city is we're actually going to deed restrict that parcel of land that's not owned by Pancratia Hall. It's owned by Westside. We will deed restrict it that the only thing that can get built on there is a second affordable housing project. So it would be a ground up apartment project that would go in. It would be dedicated towards the same 30 to 80% AMI, very, very similar to what Pancratia is doing. And then we would have a structured parking component that would be incorporated into it, very similar to what Grand Peaks is doing just to the north of there. and we would accommodate both the Pancratia Hall parking and the new affordable housing project in that location within. Now, that won't happen in the first phase, and that will be years out before that happens. But rest assured, part of our development agreement with the city says, and we'll have a deed restriction on that land that nobody can take off, that says the only thing that can get built there is more housing for people that need reduced income homes.
There we go. Great. So the next question, I just want to be sure, it says, what are the plans for the gray buildings, for the rezone gray buildings? So Jasper, we're going to have to break that one down. Let's go. I think that's probably what it means, Mark, is that area there in the red circle. What are the plans kind of in that red circle?
Yeah, so the plans in the red circle is we have two different uses, that have approached us. One of the uses that I've heard loud and clear coming from the community is actually a grocer, a local grocer. We do have some initial interest. I don't have anything for certain here, but there is some initial interest from a local grocer who wants to come in, and I've been seeking a local grocer just simply because I heard loud and clear from the community how important it was. Another use that has approached us, is the opportunity for a mixed use development. And what I mean by a mixed use development is like a commercial / retail component on the bottom with either office and or residential up on top.
That's great. Good news. So we're going to shift back over to the kind of west side of the campus. And there's a question. Mark, the two roadways that spill out onto Irving Julian there, are those going to be four-way stops, or I guess it's really three-way stops for those? Are there going to be three-way stops there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm gonna turn this over to Councilman Flynn after I make one comment. We are working with the city to make that the case, but I'm not sure the city is agreeing with us. We will definitely have stops coming out of our property. The Irving Street is owned by the city, and we are going to do traffic calming measures on the northern access point where we're going to narrow down the road and add some pedestrian crossing lights there as well, for sure. We have asked for stop signs. We have not been approved for stop signs. And Councilman, I know, has more to say about this.
You don't have time for how much I have to say about that. Folks on the call, if you believe, and some of you may not, but if you believe that always stops are an appropriate traffic control measure, not only for vehicles, which traffic engineers keep telling me, it's to control movement, right-of-way assignment for vehicle movements. I believe that stop signs should also be regarded as right-of-way assignment for pedestrians as well at intersections, because at every intersection, there is a crosswalk. Whether it's marked or not, state law says there is an implied pedestrian crosswalk at any intersection. So I have asked traffic engineering to look beyond its rule book and think about things at an intersection as being more than cars, but they are people, they are folks in wheelchairs or walkers, they are people riding bicycles, and those always stops that we have asked for, that I've heard you ask for, community, we need the traffic engineers to understand a stop sign can also assign the right of way to a person, whether that person is driving, pedaling, rolling a wheelchair, or walking. And if you believe that, as I do, please email me and say, we really want to see always stops on this development. Look beyond your rule book. Email that to me, and it will really help me with the traffic engineers, I hope.
That's great advice. So hopefully everybody can do that. Just email the councilman directly with that. I think that's really a good suggestion. So a follow-up and a little bit related, but a couple of things, Mark, just on the overall schedule. There was a question about, are we requesting community attendance at planning board? And then can we kind of repeat the critical meeting dates for that planning board? I'll just go ahead and say we would love to have neighbors at planning commission. I mean, respectfully, yes, we would absolutely ask you to please attend planning board. What I may say, and this was Mark Upshaw who asked the question, Mark, we're going to meet, as you know, in February. We want to be sure that that date is locked down. Right now, we show that in mid-March, and Mark will give you the exact date, but we'll know even more as we get closer. So on our February meeting, we'll be sure and try to identify that. But Mark, is that generally, that's the timeline that we're looking at to get to planning commission?
Yep, it is. And everything is subject to change, of course. But the dates that I have been given by the city, again, assuming that everything happens, the planning board public hearing would be March 17th. And the city council public hearing, if I've got my dates right, would be May 10th. As Marcus said, as we're moving closer to these dates, we will certainly let you know. In fact, candidly, I think it would be important too that we actually send out email reminders that these are coming up. You know, of course, we're hoping that everybody who shows up is nothing but in support of the project. I would ask that if there is anything that you would go to the public hearing and not support it, you know, if you could just, you know, call me first and at least tell me why. I mean, everybody's entitled to their opinion. I don't have any problem with that, but I would like the opportunity to make you a supporter if by chance you're not.
That's great. I might just add Councilman Flynn's email is kevin.flynn@denvergov.org. kevin.flynn@denvergov.org. One other question, and I know Jim has joined us tonight, but we're just going to probably put this answer out there for him. A couple of people have asked about how do they get information on tours of Pancratia during construction. So Jim, I may just make a suggestion, and I know you've been so gracious and always are with your time on this, that maybe we think of if there's another way to do kind of a limited tour, obviously meeting all the safety requirements, that we could communicate that. And I think it's completely fair. Maybe we communicate it to this list that certainly attends these meetings, is very active. So Jim, I'm just putting that out there. Mark, you may have other ideas, but just so you all know, neighbors that are watching this, we will find a way to communicate some of that information back to you if we can do another tour.
Yeah, Marcus, what I would recommend, and Jim has actually texted me on that very topic. Everybody has my email address, and if not, you know, we'll get it on the chat or we'll list it here. You know, just email me if you're interested, and if you are, you know, we'll get a small group put together. We'll coordinate with Jim. You know, the challenging part, as you saw with our superintendents earlier, is that, you know, there are hard hats and safety vests and goggles and all that stuff you got to wear. And it is a construction site, you know, so people can't just be wandering around. We want you to be safe. You know, we want to make sure that, you know, you don't get hurt while you're there. And that's why we have to do limited numbers. I mean, believe me, if I could take 100 people through at one shot, we would. It's just not safe and fair to the workers that are out there trying to do their job.
Great. That sounds terrific. Mark, one more time, that area that we talked about that's kind of in the bubble in the red, can you tell why again, or kind of explain, why are we changing that into that other zone district? What was the change from when we met with the neighbors last?
Yeah, so here's the difference. If it stayed pink, which is MX3 zoning with a waiver to 5 stories, what would have to happen is we would have to have a primary street or a road in between the development and the grand lawn. It would be an absolute must-have. Otherwise, you would not meet the zoning requirements. By going with the gray, which is the campus PUD zoning, we don't have to put a road there. You still have Dartmouth and what we call Road C to the west, and Dartmouth, which is to the south there, and candidly Federal to the east. It's not like the property is on an island where it doesn't have a road. It's just that the way the zoning code is written, we had to have put a road on the north side. One of the things that I wasn't clear about is whether or not we actually wanted to put a road on the north side. We know that we want pedestrian walkways to be there, But again, just by the way that the city code is written, we would have had to have had a road on that north side. And I think there's an opportunity to not put a road in there and make that more pedestrian friendly. And that's why we asked the city to incorporate that within the PUD for the campus zoning versus having it in the pink zoning.
Great. Makes perfect sense. Councilman, I'm coming back to you. So just one more time, if you could describe what the city rule book prescribes for those intersections on Irving. So I guess basically, why is the city, what's their argument why there shouldn't be three-way stops there?
That's a great follow-up, Marcus, to what Mark just explained about why that area has to be put into the PUD as opposed to being part of the rest of the rezoning, a standard rezoning, because a building has to face a primary street, and they don't think of pedestrians and a pedestrian way as being a street because there's no cars on it, right? And that's mind-boggling to me. When we just look at the books and don't think about the particular aspects of the site itself and what we're trying to do here, what the community has asked for in terms of pedestrian safety and preserving a campus atmosphere, it just makes my head explode sometimes. But on all-way stops, the rule books have changed over the years. And right now, it depends whether they will approve an all-way stop depends on the volume of traffic overall, computed with the volume of peak hour traffic, so morning and evening peak hour traffic. And if the traffic volumes are not sufficient, particularly on side streets coming in, then they will not approve an all-way stop. I find that so frustrating because they change from time to time, folks. I live in Glenbrook, down farther southwest from here. I have all-way stops at 3 or 4 consecutive intersections in a neighborhood with very low traffic volume. But that was done at a time when the rules said you could do that. They said, well, we don't want to do that anymore. And it's just very frustrating to me. We need to get them, again, to repeat myself, to think about stop signs as not only assigning right of way to a vehicle, but to people, whether they're in a vehicle or on a bicycle or in a wheelchair or pushing a stroller or riding a bike. And so the rules, I don't have the numbers with me, and I think
no worries.
I don't have the numbers with me, but it's a mathematical calculation based on traffic volume over 24-hour periods, plus the morning and evening rush.
The councilman has made, this is such a powerful argument, and particularly, and so many of you who live in Dartmouth Heights, I mean, particularly because that's a park across the way, right? So that pedestrian connection is even more important. I mean, the one thing, and councilman, not adding to that, but the logic is, right, the city, and I'm just saying this, is that if there's not enough volume, people actually won't stop at the stop signs, right, Mary Nell, and that they'll roll through it, and that actually becomes more dangerous. Well, that's, I think, pretty absurd here, because it is exactly that. It's the crossing of pedestrians here to a parkway, and we've been so clear, you all have been so clear in Dartmouth Heights about really that safe passage across there. So we think this is more than, I don't even mean a special circumstance. It makes perfect sense, really, in that argument. So Kevin, I would say, I mean, the city kind of throws that out there that we want there to be enough volume to justify it, but we certainly think there's going to be that, particularly on the pedestrian scale.
Exactly.
That's great. The one thing, there was a follow-up here, and it probably goes to both of you. Mark, is the traffic study, or has the traffic study been approved for this site? And I say that as kind of a question because there's not, I don't know if there's an official approval of a traffic study. It is certainly our requirement based on the type of units, right, and the number of traffic trips it's going to generate. And then the city prescribes, right, the traffic calming and the roadways and all of that, much about what the councilman just talked about. So is that true? It's not really approved, but they've accepted the traffic study. Is that correct?
Yeah, so what ends up happening is it's part of our TEP, which is our traffic, I forget what E stands for, in the plan, traffic engineering plan. I think the TEP, that's what it stands for. Part of our TEP, which is approving our roads. So it approves our curves for our roads. It approves the sidewalk width. It approves the tree lawns. It approves the striping, it approves where the stop signs are. So part of all the engineering approval of the TEP is the traffic study. It's just one of the pieces of it. So when we get our permit to build the roads, I guess technically one could say that our traffic study is approved. But no, we do not, you are correct in saying there is not a separate approval for just the traffic study. It's part of how the city reviews all of the traffic for the project.
Great. I think that's very fair. Sharon, I'm just going to call you out because you made a very funny comment that you wondered if the city would be interested in the volume of traffic in your front yard. So we know you know that traffic well right there, right? And it's that idea that if it's going by your house, it's likely to turn and then head south and come down that way. So I think you're absolutely right. That's something they are counting the trips. But I think, one thing we always have to keep in mind here too is Dottie or Public Works also a lot of times comes in after a project and sees how the traffic is really working and where the flows really ended up, how it's actually changed in the neighborhood, and then make that. But this is one of those things, particularly because of that pedestrian connection and connectivity to the park, that we think is pretty important. So one last one, Councilman, because it came up related to this. What's the status of the review with the CDOT on the opposite side, on the federal side?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I did have a meeting with Paul Jasadis, the regional traffic director for CDOT for the Denver metro area, and they did approve a waiver for the right turn deceleration lane into what would be Cornell. And I don't have a cursor here, but if you could point to where Cornell is. But that is the only waiver that they would give. They still, that right there, they would still require deceleration lanes up at Road A or Bates. So it would be right there where the detention, drainage detention area is. And then again, down at Dartmouth, they want a right turn deceleration lane. This, I'm happy that I got 1/3 of what I had asked for. You might have seen some news, by the way, recently that CDOT has now found funding and with the cooperation with the city to extend the median project farther to the south from Vassar down past Loretto to Floyd. So they are looking at doing the medians that now end at Vassar. I don't have a timetable for that. I think it was maybe 2024. Mark, I don't know if you heard anything different from anyone. Okay, thank you. This again goes into my argument that we're still thinking 1970s here. Deceleration lanes help traffic continue to go fast. Always stops. They're not used for speed control, of course, or traffic calming, but they are used for right-of-way assignment. And if we could just persuade these traffic engineers to think about people instead of cars, I think we'd be much farther down the road here.
Terrific.
I'm off my soapbox now.
No worries. Jasper, there's an email that if you could pull up an image here in just a second, if you could check your email. Mark, there's a follow-up, or maybe the councilman, and if you want to insert your question here, but has there been a discussion on the traffic impact at Knox and 285? So Knox and Hamden, is there discussion on that impact at all, or how far off-site do they look at?
We were not asked to look at that far south. We were asked to look at some of the traffic on Dartmouth to the east of Federal. We were not asked to look at the traffic to the south at 285.
Great. And I will say, though, for Ron, who asked that question, that is something that, they do give us particular parameters of intersections and distances that we look at. And then that might be one of those more of an offsite to see if that's, and you can see I am hosting this meeting at home. So nice to see everybody with my daughter here. So, hey, can I ask a question? There is a question, what's an update on the theater? Mark, can you give us an update on the theater?
Unfortunately, there is no update on the theater to the last conversation that we had. As everybody knows, nobody has been hit harder with the pandemic out there than the arts community, just simply because everything is 100% shut down. They are working on mission critical stuff, which is their assets at hand right now. That doesn't mean that we've lost sight of the theater here on the Loretto Heights campus. It just means that, you know, their focus is elsewhere right now, and we know it's going to be elsewhere for some time, and that's why we're agreeing to have that 4-year moratorium, so to speak, on the anything different than a theater, just so they can get their feet back on the ground, and we can figure out how to push that forward.
Great. Thanks, Mark. I think that's there's been a couple of points back to our Irving discussion about, you know, there is some concern about that hill, at the top of that hill cresting, and not wanting cars to stack or queue along Dartmouth Heights. Makes perfect sense. I think that's something that you really do evaluate based on numbers, right? So I think there's a balance of that. That's probably something we're looking at. And Sharon, I apologize. You're right. It's the number of cars that have actually ended up in your actual yard coming up that hill, right? Like that has been, you know, that intersection of people that go too fast there and come up that hill. So we agree that stopping that might be certainly a good solution there. So Mark and Kevin, go right ahead, my friend.
Thank you. If I could add to that, and thank you, Sharon, for noting that, and to Mark Upshaw, the issue of always stops, not so much a burning issue for me at the Irving crossing with Road H along the ditch, because there, at a minimum, there will be a pedestrian beacon there to alert drivers if pedestrians are crossing, and the city will continue to evaluate that. Where I was concerned about having always stops was within the campus itself, and that is, there's going to be a lot of people occupying this ground down the road, as you can see from all the residential. And my concern is having always stops so that vehicles and people at intersections know when they can cross and when they should stop, whether you're a pedestrian or a driver. And it's those 3 intersections along Road A, along the top, 1, 2, and 3, in from Bates, that I'm concerned about having always stops, because there'll be a lot of pedestrian traffic there. It's been a struggle to get city agencies to think of this not as a brownfield redevelopment like Stapleton or anything like that, but to continue to think of the community's vision that this remain recognizable as a campus, as a special 70 acres. And so there's going to be a lot of, you wouldn't see a road with no stop signs going through the University of Denver campus or the Regis University campus, where they have drives and vehicles going through the classroom buildings and the dorms and things like that. So I want the city planners and the decision makers to remember that this is supposed to be a campus, and people are supposed to respect mobility, whether you're a cyclist or a pedestrian or a driver, right? So that
Absolutely.
I'm less concerned about always stops at that Irving location than I am on the campus itself.
Councilman, there was a follow-up that came really on the other side of the park, but just I'm going to ask it. So a lot of folks have a difficult time crossing Lowell with the hill at Julian Way, right, and the Bear Creek Terrace, particularly in the evenings. What can the neighborhood do to keep this from getting worse, right? You're kind of going to that, but what else can happen when we do that, or what else can they do?
We will continue, well, we meaning the city, Dottie, will continue to monitor that location and the volumes, and then look at their rule book to determine whether there needs to be traffic control device there, whether it's a signal or a flashing beacon or some sort of pedestrian crossing. They've hesitated to put a crosswalk there because, and this might sound odd to everybody, we don't want to put a pedestrian crosswalk there because we think it might be too dangerous for people to cross, right? That sounds sort of oxymoron, or yeah, I guess oxymoronic would be the right word. But we will continue to monitor the traffic volumes there to see whether it merits some kind of a traffic control device. There is a jurisdictional issue as you go down there. As you know, when you go around the bend toward 285, you have Denver on the west side of the street and unincorporated Arapahoe County on the other side. So there would have to be coordination if you get to Girard, which comes out of Arapahoe County when you get to that intersection, and then on down to Knox. I don't think there's any city of Sheridan there, but that's on the south side of 285.
Great.
But that will be an area to watch for sure.
Okay, that's terrific. Mark, I'm going to ask you one more question, or you want to share a different image? And Jasper can share that image when you're ready.
Yeah, just real quick, just before people start leaving. And Jasper, before you throw that up, I was looking through a yearbook for something else, and I came across a photo that I want to share tonight. And it happens to be one of our attendees So I think this was from the early 1970s yearbook. So I'm hopefully not going to embarrass somebody, but I just wanted to share. If you could put that up, Jasper. You may have to turn it the other way if you can. Oh, oh no.
We're going to
Well,
tell you who it
Jasper,
is ahead of time. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, now we're upside down. Oh, we're almost there. Oh, there we go. And blow that up a little bit. So, Sister Lydia Pena, I found a picture of you. Maybe you remember this, maybe you don't. I'm not sure. But I saw it and I had to take a quick picture of it, and I definitely wanted to make sure I shared it tonight. And I was hoping that you would be on. But as a going down memory lane here from the early 1970s. So it's always fun when I dig through some of these old pictures and I find all this cool stuff. And many of these things we're trying to incorporate somehow into the project. Like as an example, something that we're going to incorporate into the project, when we tore down Marion Hall, we saved the lettering from Marion Hall. And it was actually Sister Mary Nell's idea to save the lettering. So we made sure that we pulled the lettering off before the building was demolished. And somehow we're going to use, Marion, those letters somewhere in the project. I'm not sure on what yet. But it's just like fun stuff like this. And I have to tell you, as I've been working on this project, it's really been a lot of fun, just the cool things that we've run across. So I just wanted to share this picture tonight as a stroll down memory lane.
Oh, that's a terrific picture. I love it. Mark, I'm going to come back, and I hate to come back to another traffic one, but I will because it's a fair. We've talked a lot about Irving Street tonight, and we all understand that on the east side, right, of parking, or of Irving, excuse me, there would be parking there, right? And the question is, do we expect that there will also be on the west side, right, on the Dartmouth Heights side? Is there something we can do to kind of keep it from being lined with street parking overflow? And I'll give a quick answer. I mean, I think one thing that is important is, yes, of course, people could park there, right? I'm not going to deny that. But I think one of the things that we've really tried to do in facing the homes, and Brad had to step off a little bit ago, but as you recall, a lot of those homes face Irving, right? Meaning their front doors are there. And so that means really the parking for those is behind them. It's alley loaded, if you will. And of course, some guest parking there, but we've really tried to minimize, if you will, that street traffic, that street, parking there. And so I think, may it happen? Maybe sometimes, but we're trying to minimize that. I think the other thing is we have tried to make, for all the things we just talked about, we really want to try to keep this parking. We are over parking in a lot of ways to really keep that inside the campus, if you will. Will there be spillover? Sure, but we're certainly not trying to design it that way where we're lining that street with parking.
Yeah, and I think that's right, Marcus. And the other thing too that I'd like to add to that comment is it was very intentional that we put our lowest density up against Irving Street on this project. Keep in mind, the current zoning says that we can build 150 feet tall over there, which would be 12 to 15 stories, which would be a lot more than what we have. But we heard when we sat down with the community, when he asked you the question, what would you like to see here? What the community said, loud and clear, was they wanted to see, as close to like as possible. And as if you look really closely at this illustration here, those are detached single-family homes. They won't be exactly the same as what's across the street, but they are detached single-family homes, which will have their own garages that the residents and guests, can pull up next to. Now, as you step away from Irving Street, you start to get more dense until you get to the campus core area, which it becomes even denser. And then up along Federal is where we have our most dense project. And that's very intentional. And that's not to say, Marcus, that you aren't, as you mentioned, you're not going to have people parking on Irving. There will be people parking on Irving. It's a neighborhood, it's a public street, it's meant to be parked on. But I think the way that this plan has been designed, it's not getting commercial people parking on Irving Street.
I think that's a really important point. You're absolutely right. That's about the planning and the uses, the mix of uses. So this last one, I think, is a comment. I know it is absolutely not a question. That said, that was a very good looking sister. So that's word for word me reading. Okay, I'm just going to pass that one on. That was what that was. So Mark, thanks for that picture. Let's see here. Sorry if my kids are really getting fired up. I don't see any other questions. Did you all see any questions that I missed in that list at all?
I'm just going through it from the beginning here real quick. Irving,
I'm
we
going to do
talked
the
about.
same thing here. I think, one thing I would leave folks with today, and we've got certainly have more time. If anybody has a question, they can raise their hand and I'll promote them to do it. But we will continue to do this. We will now do it on the first Tuesday of the month. We are back to our original schedule. So that's February 2nd. We will send out the notice with plenty of notice. We will continue to keep you updated on like the Planning Commission and all of that process as it moves through the city, the formal city process. So I do think that we're really excited to have some more formal meetings. Mark, as he shared, there's a lot of work already happening on the campus, the demolition that's been occurring, obviously Pancratia, and you'll start to see kind of more ramping up for that as we get to the summer for sure. And then really a lot of overlot grading and some of the things as Mark mentioned. So Mark, did you find any that I happened to miss there?
No, I think we hit them one way or the other.
Yep, got me down. Okay. Have one last thing, Councilman, you go right ahead. I see you.
Marcus, I just want to note that Sister Mary now has her hand raised in the attendees. I don't know if it's a question she hasn't had addressed or not, but her hand is up.
Thank you very much. I'll go to her. Why don't you get ready, Sister Gage? And then, Mark, just a quick question. I know construction and the weather and the elements, it sounds like the plastic keeps kind of tearing down, probably on some of the demo, right, because of the high winds. I'm sure you're aware of that, but just kind of a heads up, and you guys probably monitor that pretty closely.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And in fact, it came down just the other day. I'm very much aware of it. We are keeping everything, to contain to the best that we can. We just had some pretty significant winds, that knocked that down the other day, and I apologize for that.
No worries. I'm actually reading from Lupe, and she said that she thinks Sharon may have done it. So, no, that's not true. She didn't say that. Now I'm in trouble with both of them. That's not at all what was said. So we will keep an eye on that. Sister Gage, can you hear us? You want to ask your question?
I can hear you very well, and I apologize for my lack of technological skills. Somehow I raised my hand without intending to do that. But I want to thank you all for these wonderful illustrations, pictures, slides, really the ones of the ongoing demolition and construction of Marion Walsh and Pancratia. It's so helpful to see those. Thank you for your work in taking those photos and then making them possible for us all at home to see.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sister. We're happy to do it, and we'll continue to do that. I know those have been a big hit. We've gotten a lot of comments on that. We will work to get back to everybody on, schedules that fit within the guidelines and safety to allow some folks to do some additional tours. So I think, folks, that we've done really, really well. It's about 7 o'clock. I know it's up to about 46% returns in Georgia, so everybody's probably watching that. So I'm going to say, if anybody would like to give any closing thoughts, Kevin or Mark, anything you'd like to close with?
Councilman, you can go first.
No, nothing other than if you have views that you want me to present to traffic engineers about the always stops, please do email me. Thank you. Oh, and to Mark Upshaw's comment in the Q&A also, one of the other additions, in addition to parking along Irving or Julian, which, as Mark Upshaw observed, has a tendency to slow traffic when there's parking. The city also left Irving as wide as it is now because they're going to add bicycle lanes on either side because Irving is going to be a designated bike route. And so they left it that wide. I had initially asked them to push the tree lawn into existing Irving Street to narrow the street. And that's when they came back and said, well, we're putting bike lanes in there as well. But in addition to the cars parking along potentially parking along Irving, which provides pedestrian safety. There will also be an 8-foot tree lawn before you even get to the sidewalk on the east side. So there will be a much more protected pedestrian way on the east side than currently exists on the Dartmouth Heights side, which I think is an attached sidewalk. My recollection is there's no tree lawn there. I know Senator Aguilar is on the call here, but there's not a tree lawn on the west side, I believe. That's all I had. Thank you, Marcus.
Mark?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say is, again, thank you. I appreciate everybody showing up tonight. And I encourage you that if you have questions, please call me. If there's something that you're unhappy about, please call me. What I'm hoping for is that when we get to the public hearing, that we have everybody on this call and then some, showing up in raving support of our project.
I think that's terrific. Well, I'm going to thank everybody one last time. Happy New Year to all of you. 2021 is going to be terrific, and we're going to see a lot of activity here on the campus. So everybody go have a good night, and we will talk to you next month. All right. Bye-bye.